You are now listening to Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet, a true crime podcast where cozy meets criminal, hosted by Jasmine C.L. Prince. Grab your yarn, pour up an iced coffee, let's sit through the chaos.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet, where we sip iced coffee, work on a project, and unpack the crimes hiding in plain sight. I'm your host, as always, Jasmine C.L. Prince, and welcome back, BC3 crew. All right, y'all, so this is week 2 of the Love, Lies, and Laundering series because, it's a love month, especially Valentine's Day is this week, so we are all about romance scams. Last week, we talked about the laundering at scale, but this week, we are zoning in on a smaller operation that still caused massive damage. We are diving into the case of, and I want to make sure I pronounce his name correctly, Badetito Obafemi. I know I butchered that. I'm going to try it again. Badetito Obafemi. Nigerian descent. I think it was I forgot what tribe it was. I just knew it and it slipped my mind that fast. Irbo, I think. Irbo tribe. So please forgive me for mispronouncing the name. I did try. But, okay. He's a Georgia man who acted as a money mule in a romance scam ring that targeted victims across multiple states. He did not create the fake dating profiles. He did not write the love letters, but he made sure the money got where it needed to go. So kind of like last week. So let's talk about how smaller operators fit inside larger international fraud networks. Before we do that, y'all know we got to do our iced coffee of the episode. We are doing a vanilla bean cheesecake iced latte. And when I tell y'all this one is chef's kiss, I just kind of was like, I feel like these flavors might taste good together. And so I tried it and oh my goodness, it's one of my probably top, I would say I would put it at top 3 is how much I enjoy it. So you need a cup of cold brew or a double shot of espresso, however you want to go about it. Then you need 3/4 cup milk of choice. I always go with oat milk. 1 ounce Torani cheesecake syrup, a 1/2 ounce vanilla bean syrup, or to your liking. Some people like it sweeter, some people don't like it as sweet. And then a tablespoon of 1/2 and 1/2 or heavy cream. And then, ice in your cup. I have also been all over Barista Talk and I keep learning new things. Like I learned how you put your ice in last. Well, on top of that, I also learned that you're supposed to tum-tum your drinks. So what that means is so in one container, you mix all of your syrups with your double shot or your coffee or whatever it is. And then measure out your milk, pour that in there. This is all in one container. After you get that measured in your cup and everything's in there, all of your syrups, your milk, everything that you need is in that container. In the glasses you're going to drink out of, if you're going to line it with caramel or whatever, go ahead and line your cup, fill it up with ice. Then you pour your coffee mixture into your drink like normal, but you don't stop there. Then you take your drink, you pour it back into that container, and then pour it back into your cup and go back and forth a couple times. It's called tum-tumming to make sure that the flavors are fully mixed and incorporated, and it tastes way better. Like it's not like, oh, I got all cheesecake at the bottom, and it's like, make sure it's fully incorporated throughout the drink. Another thing I learned too is if you're going to use the Nescafe instant espresso, instead of mixing it with water, mix it with milk. So like this morning I did a regular double shot. So I did two tablespoons of the coffee with 4 ounces of oat milk instead of 4 ounces of water, and it was so much creamier. So the more tips I'm learning, I'm going to be sharing with y'all. So there's that little coffee tangent. Crochet update. I don't really have much. I'm still working through my husband's sleeves. They're taking forever. I don't know how to speed this up. I'm trying not to get bored and let the ADHD take over, but it's becoming rough. But that's where we are. We're still working on his sweater. When I get it finished, it will be posted. But yeah, that's all of the chit chat. So let's get into the story. He was not the one saying I love you. He was not the one sending heart emojis at 2 a.m. He was not the one promising forever. But without him, the money never would have moved. Badetito did not build the fake relationships. He built the relationship. He built the financial pipeline. While victims believed they were helping a man they loved, their money was quietly landing in Georgia bank accounts tied to shell companies. Over $300,000 flowed through those accounts. And that was just what investigators could prove. This is not just a story about romance fraud. This is about infrastructure. It started with a simple Facebook friend request. An elderly woman in Taney County, Missouri, struck up an online conversation with a charming stranger calling himself Kevin Condon. He said all the right things. He was attentive, caring, and seemed genuinely interested in her life. Over weeks, their chats blossomed into what felt like a real relationship. But this was no ordinary love story. It was the setup for a heartless con. The man known as Kevin would soon start asking for money under various pretenses, and behind the scenes, a far-reaching romance scam was unfolding. At the center of it was Badetito, a 42-year-old Georgia resident whose role was to collect and launder the money that victims sent in the name of love. This is a true story of how an online romance turned into a $300,000 fraud and how investigators ultimately brought him and his accomplices to justice. So, Badetito was hardly the suave figure that victims thought they were talking to. In reality, he was a Georgia-based Nigerian conman living in the small city of Dallas, Georgia. At the age of 39, he owned two modest businesses, Easy Tickets LLC and Go Easy Logistics LLC, both registered at his home address. These companies might have seemed like legitimate enterprises, but prosecutors later revealed they were part of his toolbox for fraud. By all accounts, his personal background is unremarkable on the surface. What stands out is how he chose to use his position in the U.S. as an access point for international scammers. His role was to act as a financial middleman, a money mule, shuttling illicit funds for a broader fraud ring. His story shows how someone living an otherwise low-profile life in Georgia became a critical link in a global romance scam operation. And I want y'all to see the parallels between this story and the one we covered last week. Luring the victims. So romance scams prey on the emotional vulnerabilities of people, like we've said, often older adults seeking companionship, and his scheme was a textbook example. The fraud ring behind Kevin Condon and other fake personas created multiple profiles on social media and dating platforms. Facebook was a favorite, along with dating sites like Our Time and even a site called GoFish to trawl for victims. Once they made contact, the scammers invested time in building a false relationship. Daily messages, phone calls, sweet promises, and talk of a future together. After trust and affection were cultivated, the request for money would begin. And like we saw last week or with the Dalen Pierce story, it's just the MO was always the same or very similar. The excuses were varied but carefully chosen to tug at heartstrings or exploit the victim's trust. Victims were told stories designed to justify it's always urgency too, urgent financial help. Like there's a business crisis, a sudden problem with and it's always overseas business venture or investment that needed cash to resolve, or a medical emergency like there was an accident or health issues requiring money for hospital bills or treatment, or travel troubles. I'm stranded abroad without access to funds. I need money for airfare or travel documents to finally come see you in person. Or legal woes. In one elaborate lie, a scammer claimed to be jailed overseas and needed $40,000 for court fees in South Africa to be released. Each story was a fiction crafted to sound plausible and urgent. The Missouri woman who believed Kevin Condon was told he had an overseas construction project and later a medical issue. He persuaded her to send about $27,460 over time to help him. Then came the even bolder request. Kevin said he'd been arrested abroad and begged for $40,000 to pay a court for his release, money that was to be deposited directly into Obafemi's bank account. Fortunately, this particular $40,000 payment was never completed as Kevin's tale began to unravel, which we'll get into. But this was not an isolated incident. The investigation later showed that several victims across multiple states had been caught up in the scam between 2016 and 2018. Among them, Taney County, Missouri, the victim who interacted with Kevin Condon via Facebook, losing $27,460 before balking at the additional $40,000 request. Then we had someone from Northfield, Minnesota. This victim met a scammer on a dating site and eventually sent a staggering, and when I say staggering, I mean staggering, $230,000, believing she was helping someone she loved. And then in Bergen County, New Jersey, another victim, wooed online, was defrauded of approximately $54,000 in the guise of helping her distant romantic partner. I want to know, and I guess this is part of being a scammer, who you target, how you know they have money, how you know they have access to the money, and all of that. That's what makes them the scammers. But also, people just giving this kind of, and this is not to victim shame, but just giving this kind of money to someone they've never met in person. $27,000, $230,000, and $54,000. Like, that's not pocket change. For you to have access to that amount of money and then not be as diligent in making sure you're not being scammed, like, I don't understand. And again, I'm trying not to victim shame, but I want to understand the thought process or the psychology of people who are able to be scammed, especially for a large amount of money. And I feel like being scammed in a romance scam versus being scammed from like an investment scam are two different types of people. So in particular, the ones who get scammed from romance scams, I really want to see, I don't know if there's data behind it or if there's any type of psychology, like if people sat down and talked to them, like what causes you to be so trusting and so forthcoming with your money to someone you've never met in person? That's what I would want to ask someone who has been scammed. Because like I said, with investment scams, I can see how you're like someone's telling you, hey, give me $40,000. I'm going to put it in this investment and it's going to grow your money. When they give you like, oh, it's going to grow 18%, that should be your red flag. But just the thought of giving someone who says they're a financial planner money, again, I would do my due diligence. But that type of scam versus a romance scam, just it's always interesting to me. But I'm going off on a tangent. In total, the fraud ring stole over $300,000 from these and potentially other victims during the scheme. Many of the victims were elderly or otherwise vulnerable, precisely the kind of people romance scammers often target for their life savings. The pattern is always similar: a lonely heart, a meticulously crafted lie, and large sums of money disappearing. And again, like we said, they target the elderly or otherwise vulnerable, but still, a lot of elderly people are still very sharp in their thought processes. For instance, I saw on TikTok, there was an elderly man who had a caretaker, and she thought that he wasn't going to notice that she was scamming him, but he did. And he collected all the evidence and then gave the evidence to the police. And he had basically did everything that they needed him to do to convict her. He knew she was taking his money. So again, it's interesting to see who is able to be scammed and who's not. So here's the money laundering operation. Obadito's importance to the scheme was simple. He gave the scammers a domestic foothold in the United States financial system. Directly asking victims to wire money to an overseas account might garner some suspicion, like, why am I sending this to Africa when you say you live here? That doesn't make any sense. So the conspirators funneled funds through his US-based accounts. He coordinated the bank details and timing for incoming wire transfers, essentially serving as the bagman for the operation. Once a victim sent money, whether it was a bank wire, a deposited check, or another transfer, it would land in one of his accounts. He used several accounts under his control, including those of his two companies, Easy Tickets LLC and Go Easy Logistics LLC, as well as personal bank accounts. So by routing money into business accounts, he could mask the true nature of the funds, making the transfers look like ordinary commercial transactions. After receiving the money, he would withdraw cash and redistribute funds to other accounts or individuals as directed by his co-conspirators. Some of the stolen money he kept for himself, of course, essentially his commission for acting as a mule, and the rest he sent onward, mostly overseas, to the fraud architects who likely were based abroad. Again, like I said last week, if I'm the one over here on soil, the face of it, and I'm taking up more of a risk, because if I get arrested, they're not going to come after you, or they probably can't come after you because you're overseas, my cut is going to be bigger. I feel like they're just downplaying the risk they're taking. But again, that's just me. This laundering process made it harder for authorities to trace the money flow directly to the end scammers, buying time for the scheme to continue. For nearly 2 years, he managed to quietly move hundreds of thousands of dollars of victim payments through banks in this way, all from the relative obscurity of his Georgia residence. Investigators noted that his activities fit the classic definition of a money mule. As acting U.S. Attorney Teresa Moore explained, quote, "Foreign fraudsters rely on American accomplices to facilitate their schemes. These so-called money mules pocket a share of every stolen dollar and profit from the victimization of others," end quote. In his case, his businesses and bank accounts were the conduits that enabled international con artists to siphon money from U.S. victims while keeping their own hands clean. All right, so 2018, some of the victims or their families, because again, like I said, if you have elderly people, especially ones who are single, lonely, and want companionship, please keep an eye on their finances. They began reporting the suspicious relationships and financial losses, alerting law enforcement to the possibility of a romance scam ring. A multi-agency investigation unfolded, eventually connecting the dots between the desperate victim reports in Missouri, Minnesota, and New Jersey. Agents of the FBI and Homeland Security investigation joined forces with local police, including the Northfield Police in Minnesota, to track the money trail. What they found were common denominators. The funds from different victims all flowed into accounts tied to Badetito. On July 27, 2021, a federal grand jury in the Western District of Missouri indicted him on his role in the fraud. The indictment was extensive, reflecting the complexity of the scheme. 14 counts in all. It charged him with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering, 11 substantive counts of money laundering, and even operating an unlicensed money transmitting business. This array of charges underscored that he wasn't just passively handling money. Prosecutors alleged he was an active conspirator who knowingly facilitated the fraud across state and national borders. Notably, his indictment was announced as part of a nationwide law enforcement push known as the Money Mule Initiative. Each year, the U.S. Department of Justice coordinates a crackdown on money mules, people who transfer stolen funds on behalf of scammers. And in 2021, his case was highlighted in this effort. In the span of about 10 weeks around that time, federal authorities took action against 4,750 money mules across every state through measures ranging from warning letters to criminal charges. He was one of more than 30 individuals criminally charged for moving victim payments or laundering fraud proceeds. His indictment, alongside an unrelated case of a Florida man involved in an email scam, showed that law enforcement was intent on shutting down the pipelines that fraudsters used to get away with their crimes. After the indictment, Badetito was arrested and brought to Missouri to face charges. Court records indicate that he was initially released on bond with certain conditions. At one point, a judge modified his release conditions in late 2023 as the case moved slowly through the system. But facing a mountain of evidence, including financial records and the communications tying him to the scam, he eventually chose to cooperate with authorities and enter a guilty plea rather than go to trial, which was wise. So on April 18th, 2024, nearly 3 years after his indictment, he pleaded guilty to a single count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. In his plea agreement, he admitted to participating in a romance scam operation that targeted victims in Missouri, Minnesota, and New Jersey from 2016 to 2018. By pleading guilty, he accepted responsibility for helping to launder approximately $311,000 in illicit funds stolen from those victims. He acknowledged that he coordinated with others to receive the money and move it through his accounts, fully aware that the funds were the proceeds of crime. Essentially, he conceded that he was an integral part of a conspiracy built on fraudulent relationships and lies told to vulnerable people. About a year later, justice was finally served. On April 9th, 2025, U.S. Chief District Judge Beth Phillips sentenced Badetito to 24 months in federal prison. In addition, he was ordered to serve 3 years of supervised release after his prison term and to pay $311,520 in restitution to the victims of his crimes. Federal sentences have no parole, so he will serve the full 2 years behind bars. The 24-month sentence might seem modest given the large sum of money involved, but it reflected several factors. His plea deal, which likely reduced the counts and potential prison time, his role as a facilitator rather than the mastermind, and possibly his cooperation in providing information on the broader scam network. In court, his case was presented not just as an isolated incident, but as an example of the epidemic of fraud targeting seniors and vulnerable individuals. Prosecutors highlighted how he and his co-conspirators exploited the emotions and trust of their victims for financial gain. One press release noted the cruel double impact of such crimes. Quote, perpetrators not only steal the victim's money, but they also manipulate their emotions and rob them of a genuine relationship, end quote, as U.S. Attorney Rochelle Aud Crow later said about romance scam cases. His sentencing, coming almost a year after his guilty plea, marked the end of a years-long saga and hopefully a measure of closure for the victims he helped defraud. Okay, so the co-conspirators and the links to a broader fraud network. One striking aspect of this case is that Badetito did not act alone. He was one piece of a much larger puzzle. The romance scam ring involved unidentified conspirators who actually carried out the direct contact with victims. These individuals used fake identities like Kevin Condon to seduce victims online, and they often purported to be Americans working abroad, a common tactic in romance scams. For example, Kevin claimed to be overseas on business. Others might pose as oil rig engineers, doctors in foreign hospitals, or contractors on international projects, roles that conveniently explain why they can't meet in person but need financial help. Sidebar: all of these occupations that they've given are high earning careers. So the fact that you're saying you need money, but you're a doctor in a foreign hospital or a contractor on a project, that would raise red flags. But again, they're targeting elderly people who might not think like that. But I would think they wouldn't claim to be such a high earning individual and then turn around and ask for money. Like 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4 in that instance. But clearly they know what they're doing because it was working. But just me in my mind, I'll be like, okay, if you say you're a doctor, then why do you need money? Why don't you have access to your money? What's really going on? While his name is now known due to the U.S. court proceedings, the true identities of the scammers behind those fake profiles remain anonymous and likely overseas. Given his Nigerian origin and the patterns in the scam, it is very likely that the core perpetrators were part of a West African fraud network, often based in Nigeria or Ghana, where many such romance scams originate. Indeed, the U.S. Department of Justice has prosecuted several Nigerian nationals in recent years for similar romance frauds targeting Americans. His case illustrates how these cross-border frauds operate. International scammers team up with stateside associates like him to handle the money flow. By using someone on U.S. soil with U.S. bank accounts, the scammers make it easier for victims to send money. Victims feel safer wiring funds to a domestic account and easier to quickly disperse those funds wherever they need to go. So these accomplices are often called money mules, and some are witting participants like he was, while others are unwitting individuals duped into forwarding money. In this scheme, he was a known money mule. Like, he knew what he was doing. He profited directly from each transfer, and he took a cut before sending the rest overseas. So it wasn't like they were just, hey, can you just send us money? No, he knew exactly what he was doing. Investigators did not publicly name any co-defendants in his indictment, specifically for the romance scam, suggesting that his co-conspirators abroad were beyond the immediate reach of U.S. law enforcement or were part of a separate investigation, which goes back to my original point that I'm saying today and I said last week. If I'm the one taking the higher risk, I'm also taking the higher cut. Because you are overseas, you are out of jurisdiction, you can't be prosecuted. So I'm taking more money. But again, that's just me. Romance scam rings can be sprawling, with members recruiting each other and often staying anonymous online. However, the fact that he was caught and convicted sent a message to those conspirators. Their money pipeline had been disrupted. It's also possible that he provided information to authorities about his overseas partners as part of his plea, information that could aid future investigations. In similar cases, U.S. officials have worked with foreign partners to arrest scammers abroad, though it can be challenging. As FBI Special Agent Christopher Johnson noted in a related case, quote, overseas scammers can be difficult to identify and investigate, but this case is an example of the strength of the FBI's global footprint. We will not hesitate to reach across geographical boundaries, end quote, to pursue those targeting the elderly. The romance scam that he was a part of is a much wider web, one that law enforcement is aggressively trying to untangle. But here is the wider problem. Badetito's case is just one chapter in a far larger story. As we saw last week, we've seen today, we're going to keep seeing for the rest of this series. And it's even we've seen with the Dalen Pierce story. It's not even international people that are doing this. It is also Americans who are participating in romance scams. In recent years, they have exploded in scale, becoming one of the costliest forms of consumer fraud. Every year, thousands of people in the United States fall prey to similar online relationship scams. The FTC reported that in 2022 alone, nearly 70,000 people had filed romance scam complaints, with reported losses reaching a staggering $1.3 billion with a B as in boy. By 2023, the FBI noted Americans were still reporting over 64,000 romance scams with losses around $1.14 again billion dollars. These numbers are likely underestimates since many victims are embarrassed or unwilling to report being defrauded by a supposed lover. Elderly victims are especially at risk. So again, I want to say that yes, people typically target elderly people, but it's been seen in these cases that international fraud rings target elderly people. But they aren't the only population that is at risk. Anybody who's looking for companionship is at risk. Those are, and the younger ones who are like, 30s, 40s, 50s, that age group seems to be targeted by actual Americans doing the romance scamming. Like, again, going back to episode 3, I think it was, with Dalen Pierce. He was, I think, in his 40s at the time, American, a black man. Of course, we covered him on the show. A black man in his, I think, 40s, and he targeted American women. So they were younger, they're not elderly, but again, they were looking for companionship. So just because you're not an elderly person does not mean you're not at risk of being targeted. This case stands as a cautionary tale and a representative example of how these scams operate and the damage they inflict. It highlights several key aspects of the wider problem: the use of social media and dating sites to target victims, the grooming of trust through constant communication, the range of false scenarios deployed to solicit funds, and the crucial role of money mules in facilitating the cross-border flow of stolen money. It also underscores the importance of law enforcement initiatives focusing on elder fraud and money laundering. The Department of Justice, through its Elder Fraud Initiative, has been working to coordinate such efforts and to raise public awareness about scams targeting those over 60. In his case, agencies from local police to the FBI and HSI collaborated, showing that a concerted effort can indeed penetrate these schemes and bring perpetrators to justice. The significance of his conviction is twofold. First, it provided justice for the victims. Of course, that's what we always want to see. Not only was he punished, but the court ordered full restitution, signaling that the system aims to help make victims whole through recovering money though recovering fraud money can be a challenge, and it's unclear what portion of the $311,520 will ultimately be collected from him. Secondly, this case serves as an educational example for the public, as I'm trying to do. So, we're covering this on True Crime podcasts like me. There's news stories. The DOJ press releases about cases like this spread the word about how romance scams work, hopefully preventing future victims from falling into similar traps. I have seen, though, in trying to cover these cases, they are not widely publicized. So even me trying to do research on them, trying to find pictures, trying to find in-depth details, the DOJ website has been phenomenal because that's where I'm getting most of my information from. Most of my research is coming from those press releases and everything they put out about them. But I might get one article, like this one, since he's from Georgia. There were a couple of Georgia sources that I got, but it's not easy to find. a lot of information because they're not widely publicized, which I think is a problem because more people need to know so that they are vigilant in what to look for. So in the end, this story is a mix of tragedy and caution. It's tragic in the sense that it involves the emotional betrayal of lonely individuals, people who believe they had found companionship only to have their hearts and bank accounts cruelly exploited. One can only imagine the emotional fallout for a victim who learns that the romance was a ruse. The shame, anger, heartbreak, embarrassment are all often as painful as the financial loss. But his tale is also a cautionary one. It exposes the inner workings of a romance scam and shows that even those hiding behind screens and fake names can be unmasked. Through diligent investigative work, cooperation across agencies and even countries, and targeted initiatives like the Money Mule crackdown, law enforcement was able to stop this fraud ring and ensure that a key player faced consequences. So, sip or spill. Here's the question. Thinking about this week's story and last week's. If you never directly speak to the victim, you never send the love messages, you never promise marriage, but you knowingly move the stolen money, are you just as guilty? Is the money mule just a facilitator, or are they equally responsible for the emotional and financial damage? Because this week and last week, they were both money mules. Sip if you think the infrastructure is just as dangerous as the scammer, or spill if you think the emotional manipulator carries more blame. Because without the pipeline, the scam collapses. All right, y'all. So that is it. Romance scams are not just about lonely people and fake profiles. They're about systems and networks and all of that. And that's what makes these cases so devastating. But we're going to keep going. We're going to do some more in this series. But if you've been finding this helpful, please leave a rating, 5-star rating and review on Apple and Spotify. Once I get more reviews, I'll go back to reading them. I just ran out. I do respond to all the comments on Spotify, so if you want to comment on any episode, I will respond to that. I am building up my Patreon, but if you want to support me more directly, you can do so over there. I do have a Facebook group. The link will be in the description box for that as well. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram and Threads and what's the other one? Substack. I think that is it. Thank y'all for rocking with me for another week. I will see y'all back for a brand new episode next Tuesday. Y'all keep it safe and don't get scammed if you're trying to find a relationship. Just try to do it the old-fashioned way if you can. But that's all I have for y'all. See y'all next week. Bye!
Disclaimer. Great effort is made to ensure that all materials used in Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet adhere to fair use guidelines. No copyright infringement is intended. If you are the copyright owner or represent the owner of any material used in this content and have concerns about its use, please contact me and I will promptly address the issue.